Welcome, welcome, welcome. We will get started here in about 3 more minutes. We are excited to have you all join us for Silence to Change Community Conversation Series as we can combat our mental health during this politically charged season. So, thank you all for joining us, and just be sure that you can ask questions and utilize that chat function before we get started. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy our conversation this evening.
Thank you, Jewel. Come on in the room, everyone. Good evening, good evening, good evening. My name is Shanti Das. Come on into the room. I am so excited about this conversation and thank you for showing up and being present today. We're going to get started in about 2 minutes, so we'll give a few more people a chance to come in the room. This will be a recorded conversation, so if you got friends, family members, spouses, girlfriends, partners, anybody that couldn't make it, don't worry, we'll be able to get this information out into the community. So come on in. Welcome, welcome. If you're just coming into the room, I see we had a couple more participants join. Thank you, thank you. This is a series of conversations that Silence to Shame is going to be doing during this critical time in our nation. Very important conversation as we just take the time to reflect and stop and pause and focus on our own mental wellness and how these issues affect us on a day-to-day basis. So we got about 1 minute and then we're going to get started. If you want to just check in and say where you're checking in from, feel free to post it in the chat. I'd love to shout you out and say hello. I think most of the panelists were checking in from ATL, but this is virtual, so could have people checking in from anywhere. Or in the Q&A. I don't know if Q&A has been disabled, but okay, we are right at 6:35. All right, welcome, 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 everyone. My name is Shanti Das. I am the CEO and founder of Silence to Shame Incorporated. We are a mental health nonprofit. We're based in Atlanta, but we are a national nonprofit, and we exist to empower and educate communities around emotional health and wellness. So welcome to Empowered Minds, Navigating the Political Landscape. This is the first of 3 conversations that we're going to be having. Weathering the Storm, Mental Health in a Turbulent Political Climate. And so we're going to talk about understanding the current political atmosphere and its psychological effects, navigating intergenerational differences in political views in communities and families and households, because we know how tricky that can be. And also we're going to give you techniques for preserving your mental well-being in times of political tension. And so I am super excited with our esteemed panelists that we have here today, and just want to thank them again for their time, their talent, and their input. And so I am going to go around and introduce everyone, and I'd love for them to say a little bit about their background and why mental health matters to them. So first, I'll go by our flyer. This first young lady that I will introduce, I've known probably since I was in middle school, maybe not even high school. She is a former mayor of the city of Atlanta and also the former senior advisor to the President of the United States. I am super, super excited to welcome my dear friend, Keisha Lance Bottoms. Welcome, Keisha.
Thank you so much, Shanti. I'm so glad to join you. And as I shared before we came on live, I am so grateful and so proud of the work that you are doing. It's needed and not talked about enough, especially in the African American community. So thank you, thank you, thank you. We all need this conversation.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to have you here. Next up, we have Natasha Taylor. She's the Deputy Director of a wonderful organization called Georgia Watch. Welcome, Natasha.
Hi, Shanti. And again, I echo Keisha's sentiments. I'm really excited that you are having this conversation and really honored to be amongst these esteemed panelists. And, as someone personally impacted by mental health, both within my family and then professionally impacted by seeing the lack of resources out there available to our communities, I'm really, really excited that you are having this conversation. It's an important conversation to have.
Absolutely. And thank you, Natasha. I know we have a lot of people in common, so excited to get to know you more and to have your input this evening. Next up, we have Gigi. I hope I'm not going to butcher this. Bastian?
You got it. You got it. Thank you so
Yes.
much.
She is a PhD, MA, and MSCR clinical psychologist. We're so grateful, Gigi, to have your expertise here on the panel today. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Gigi.
Sure. Well, thank you, Shanti, and it is an honor. I'll add my voice to the chorus of thanks for the opportunity to be a part of such an important and timely conversation. The full name is Gilberte, but I do go by Gigi, clinical psychologist. I wear both the hats of teaching future docs, of working in an academic environment, but also do clinical work outside of that space where I specialize in trauma and focus a lot on self-care and how we keep ourselves whole, in the environment and the context that we live in. And what's been great about this time is that there's so much more conversation and awareness happening around mental health. So I think a lot of us in the field are like, great, it's really good that we're talking about this. But what you've tapped into with this conversation, I think, is a really often overlooked piece of these other pieces of the environment that we're sitting in that impact on our mental health. So I'm thrilled to be a part of this conversation and look forward to what will come out of it.
Awesome. Thank you again for joining us and participating. And last but certainly not least, we have one of my mentees and someone that is so incredibly amazing at what she does. And she probably is one of the premier young clinical psychologists for Black men and women of color, or Black people and men and women of color, rather. And so I want to welcome Dr. Shonda Reynolds to the panel.
Thank you so much, Auntie Shanti, for allowing me to be on this panel. I appreciate the invitation. It is such a pleasure to be with such esteemed women with such amazing backgrounds. I tried to put in the chat that I'm hailing from Washington, D.C. by way of Delaware, so 302, stand up if y'all are in the building. But I can't wait to hop into this conversation because election stress is real. And I think a lot of people, especially my friends who do work in the political sectors, they're experiencing it and it weighs on them. So allowing us to just have this conversation in this manner with the public, I think is just so important. So giving you your flowers and also excited about this opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Shonda. And finally, we have our chat open. So we have check-ins from Albany, New York, Atlanta, Georgia, Pat Buford Restoration Group Home, Boston, Massachusetts, Noonan. Wow, ATL. I'm loving this. Manhattan, down in Chelsea. Oh, by way of Trinidad and Tobago. Okay, so wonderful, wonderful check-in. Looking forward to, again, getting you all involved for Q&A, but we're going to go ahead and delve right in. I want to ask each panelist, how have you seen the current political environment affect individuals' mental health, particularly in terms of anxiety and stress levels? And I don't know, Gigi, if you want to start, we can have you kick it off.
We're happy to do that. So, as I mentioned, I think the reality of the political season and environment that we're living in is present for all of us, but it's not something that we necessarily are connecting with the state of mental well-being for ourselves as individuals, but also on the collective, right, on all of us as a society. And so really welcome the opportunity to kind of look at that. And I want to acknowledge that this is an area where in the field of psychology, we're still working to kind of build up the research and the science space that really looks at the intersection between mental health and what happens in politics in our society. But what little work has been done in this space is definitely starting to bear out that this, increasingly toxic kind of quality and characteristic of our politics is definitely taking a toll on the mental health of our societies. And we see it weigh a little bit more heavily on certain groups. But across the board, I think we can see the toll that it takes in the tone and tenor of the conversations that we're having in our neighborhoods and our families and our churches and our communities, the stress that it's creating, and also seeing that manifested not only in terms of our mental health, but in our physical health, right? We know that there's a really critical bridge and connection between what's happening with the state of the mind and how that manifests in our bodies. And so the importance of thinking intentionally about how we take care of ourselves and maintain psychological safety for ourselves as individuals first, and then in our families and our communities, could not be more important than it is now, right? We're seeing manifestations that range from everything from your chronic day-to-day stress of being kept up at night, thinking about what's going to happen with politics, to sleep disturbances, all the way through to even suicidal thoughts and behaviors. And so I think this could not be more serious, right? We see even in our discourse on social media how folks can start to detach themselves from the people on the other side of our conversations, and sometimes get reckless in how we're engaging each other. And that has everything to do with what kind of society we are. And so there's a lot that I know we're going to unpack as over the course of this conversation. But absolutely, we're seeing the toll of the tone and quality of our political discourse and our political reality across all segments of our society right now.
Absolutely. I mean, myself, just, personally, I find myself up late at night. And I don't live on the south side of Atlanta anymore. I live in a predominantly white area, and, just even nervous about putting up political signs in my yard. I mean, there's this certain level of anxiety, and it shouldn't be like that. I remember, no matter what, in Silence to Shame, we are, nonpartisan organization. We just want people to vote. But no matter who your candidate is, I shouldn't feel like fear of my life, or I shouldn't feel inferior. I shouldn't be afraid to talk about and speak up about the candidate, that I am supporting. And so just so much stress going on. I want to go next to you, Natasha, just being, in the state of Georgia, which we know is important in this particular election. What are you seeing, and what are you hearing, working with Georgia Watch?
It's interesting that you asked this question, because we lead a civic advocacy and policy workshop, and I've led that workshop for the past 3 years for over 700 community members across the state. And every time I talk about engaging in civic advocacy and reaching out to lawmakers and getting to know who your elected officials are, who you're voting for, a lot across the board, one, community members feel like, what's the point? And this is students all the way up to seniors. What's the point? Nothing's going to change. We're trying to empower communities to be their own best advocates. They know what they need in their communities. They know, what's missing, what's lacking in our communities, but they're like, there's no point in really mentioning anything. There's no point in voting. There's no point in reaching out. I don't feel like my voice is going to be heard. And so we've really tried to work with the communities to say, and we all know this, we all hear about our federal elections all the time, but know your local commissioners, know your mayor, know your city council members, know the people that have the direct impact on your communities on a day-to-day basis. And if you can get in contact with those people and celebrate small wins, then the longer term goals of getting to a whole thriving state don't seem as unachievable. So although people are really feeling despondent, I think it's the responsibility of us on this call and those listening in to continue to provide that encouragement to say, let's celebrate small wins. And I know we're going to get all into this, but it does help to kind of reshift that power dynamic and that power narrative to say these are elected officials that you're going to put in power, that you have put into the positions that they're in, and they are here to serve you, and then using that power and your voice to create the change that you want to see.
Absolutely. Thank you, Natasha, and thank you for the work that you've been doing. Keisha, you obviously are on the front lines nationally and locally. Have you seen anything or talked to colleagues, or, what are your thoughts around how this political season, if you will, is affecting one's overall mental health?
Oh, Shanti, there was one point during this political season I described to someone that I felt as if I was going through the stages of grief. One day I was angry, another day I was sad, and I mean, I really did feel like I was experiencing grief, and it was a reminder for me, for as much as I have to stay dialed in, that sometimes I need to dial out too. And I think for those of us who work on campaigns, you're used to ups and downs, but this has been a season like none other. And we also know, we have a candidate who served in office before, so we're not speculating about the unknown. We know what, a certain 4 years in our lives were like. So I think that it's warranted, certainly, but just personally, at some point, I started binging on Bridgerton. I had to turn off the news because I have it on in my car. I'm constantly scrolling my phone. And the week of the DNC convention, I noticed I was in this really great mood, not just because of the convention, but like I was like on 10 trillion happy. And I got the notification on my phone of my screen time. My screen time was like 50% of what it normally averages. And that was a reminder for me, again, just the anxiety and depression that can come along with us doing the things that we do every day. We're constantly looking at our phones. We're constantly uh, just processing and receiving information. I'm going to bed looking at my phone. I wake up, I looking at my phone. And so I think for so many people who work in politics, we're experiencing that, but I also think the country's experiencing it too. There's a lot of anxiety, and I have to remind myself, or as much as I have to stay informed, that for my own mental well-being, sometimes I need to take in less information.
Yes, thank you for that. And thank you for, it was interesting you relating it to grief, because I think I've gone through some of those stages of this too. And I honor you for taking care of yourself and knowing when to unplug, no matter who you are, no matter what your title is, no matter how close or attached you are to this political process, you still have to take care of yourself. And so I'd love to kick it over to Dr. Shonda. And can you talk a little bit about that and how it's very easy for us to feel like we are kind of going through some of the stages of grief, and how it can have such an impact on our anxiety and emotional health and wellness?
Absolutely. Well, I do want to say I appreciate, everyone's transparency on this panel, because, I personally can say as well that during election season, when we see so much in the news and so much in the media, it does exacerbate anxiety and stress. And I want to remind you all and us all that we're not alone, because there was a study that was conducted around 2020, the Stress in America survey, and they said about 77% of Americans reported that they were nervous about the future of the nation. And this contributed to a significant amount of stress that they experienced at that time. And 71% cited the political climate as a major stressor. And this was intensified when they identified different Black and people of color who were a part of this survey. And this really is just a testament to how, when we are engaging in the political season, when again tensions are high, people are unsure about what the future holds, then it can in fact exacerbate different mental health related symptoms associated with anxiety, depression. Some studies even talked about how PTSD related symptoms can be associated with that. So it's really important for us to pay attention to our bodies. And, do I need to take a break from the news and watch Bridgerton? Do I need to take a break from listening to political podcasts and radio shows for a moment, just so that I can allow myself to debrief and not just overload myself with so much dense, impactful information all the time? We can be informed without overloading ourselves with too much information. So it's important for us to be aware of that. And I'm happy we're in this space where we're able to be vulnerable.
Absolutely. And thanks for those statistics. I find myself recording some of my programming now, so I can like fast forward through the commercials, because again, it's not a healthy, spirited campaign, on all fronts. And so the negativity is just too much at times. And so, yeah, I definitely find myself doing that. my next question, I want to go back to you. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't get to Gigi. Did we get to you, Gigi? Oh, I did. Okay, sorry. My next question, I'm going to go back to Natasha. How do you think the role of media, both social and traditional, shape public perception and discourse during the politically turbulent period? And what responsibility do media outlets have in reporting responsibly? I know that's a loaded question, but, and anybody else can jump in after that if you'd like to add to that.
Yeah, very loaded, but I think the media plays a pivotal role in shaping public perception and discourse, and particularly during politically turbulent times. Coming from someone who started high school when we all had like that one computer that everyone had to share, and we couldn't get on the internet, like, those were the times that I was from. We all would go outside and look at the sky. So we didn't have social media back then. And I just felt like, our mental health was better. You know what I mean? We weren't just constantly exposed to, like you said, Shanti, you're skipping through commercials because it's just constant negative information being kind of force fed to us on a consistent basis. So, social media platforms have really revolutionized how we access and share information. But this has the potential, to either be positive and foster greater civic engagement and connect people, but it also has significant drawbacks, with the spread of misinformation, disinformation, the amplification of extreme viewpoints. You have these echo chambers that are created. When users are exposed to just, primary, information that lines up in that algorithm, as again, an older person, I don't even know how it all works sometimes, but you recognize that certain things are being fed to you. So, and even traditional media now isn't even immune to that bias, and the pressure of sensationalism, and, media is becoming more competitive. So retaining audiences is crucial, to the sustainability of their platforms. So I think it leads to coverage that, really emphasizes conflict and controversy over nuance and context. So the
Oh,
responsibility,
you said a word just now. Yes.
I mean, yeah, these are the opinions of Natasha Taylor and not Georgia Watch sometimes, but I really just think it's important for media outlets to, we all know this, provide accurate, balanced, comprehensive reporting, especially during times where you can have this political polarization happening. And they just have to make sure that they're providing accurate, contextual information, including diverse perspectives. Nothing's wrong for us. It's not a problem for us to disagree, but can we come to the middle? Can we find a way to, again, make society better and work together for the greater good of the people? I know that's my altruistic self, but that should be the goal. Everyone has a middle point that we can typically get to if we have, constructive discourse. And then it's really important on social media to mitigate misinformation. I know that does not seem to be the priority now, but again, I think, again, Shanti, you're starting this conversation here, and it's our responsibility to, as much as we can, I'm not very active on social media, but try to get on and combat the misinformation that's being put out there. I really think communities need to harness, again, our power and our ability to change the narrative and shift the messaging that is being put out there. As much as someone can get up and, post something negative on social media, the six of us right here on this panel can come back and put something positive out to, really well inform the communities that are receiving this information.
100%. And thank you for that, Natasha. I recall it was like maybe 3 or 4 months ago, I was talking to my executive director, Jewel Gooding, who's here with us off camera. And I was like, we were both saying, we just need to do something, right? To start this conversation, to get people to understanding. And so I see we have a few more people that joined. So just to reset the room, if you are just now joining us, you're tuned in to the political climate and mental health, weathering the storm, mental health in a turbulent political climate. I am Shanti Das, your moderator, and we have an illustrious panel here. And so did anyone else like to weigh in on the role or the responsibility of media outlets during election?
I just wanted to reinforce the piece that Natasha mentioned in terms of just the perpetual nature of bombardment with information. That's our reality right now, right? When we live in the reality of a 24-hour news cycle situation of ready access to the internet and social media, there is no relief or reprieve from this stuff. It's constant, right? And so I think that speaks to how much harder the work of putting in those guardrails and whatever those protective practices and strategies are to keep ourselves in some state of sanity, of feeling stable, becomes really, really key. But I think that's what makes what we're sitting in really distinct from what generations before us had to face, is that it literally is constantly coming at us. And so it absolutely requires an intentional and relentless strategy to combat that, with taking those pauses, getting some perspective from some of this, choosing what battles to take our hands off of with relatives, with people in the workplace, etc., to not expend unnecessary sort of energy getting worked up around these things, and figuring out how to channel that into constructive action instead. So just really wanted to reinforce that feature of our time right now of constant access.
And if I can, I mean, it's social media is designed to be addictive, right? So we find ourselves just scrolling, taking in all this information, and I find myself like getting a headache. Like, what am I doing? Like, you just get caught in the matrix of just kind of scrolling through and reading things that aren't really fruitful to you. And you'll be sitting right next to somebody, and both of you are just on your phones, scrolling. So we've lost that kind of human connection as well, which I think again plays into the mental health crisis that we're in as a country.
Absolutely.
I
Go
was
ahead,
just
please.
also,
Yeah.
choosing your piece. I was recently on a plane next to a guy, and it was a pretty long plane ride. And he went into all kinds of political stuff. And I thought to myself, I said, now, am I going to feel a certain way when I get off this plane that I didn't counter everything that he said? Or will I be okay letting him wallow in his ignorance? And because I knew I was going to be on this plane with him for 2 hours, I chose to let him wallow in his ignorance, because I knew there was nothing I was going to say in that 2 hour plane ride that was going to change anything about the way that he felt. But I was very proud of myself, because I'm used to, like, oh, you said this, all right, let's go toe to toe. But again, just going back to, sometimes you have to protect your own peace. The thing about putting your oxygen mask on first, like I chose to put my oxygen mask and I just sat next to him on the plane. I'm like, really? Well, that's really interesting. Okay. And I felt great when I got off of that plane.
And that's okay. Again, going back to choosing you, we can certainly get caught up in the back and forth, but some days you don't have to. It's okay to choose you. I do want to go back to you real quick, Keisha. In light of the political climate, how can citizens be encouraged to actively participate in civic engagement and advocacy while navigating their emotional health? Like, say if you did want to respond or kind of talk to someone or participate, what do you think we can do in addition to choosing your piece? How can we do it in an effective way that is still healthy for us?
If it's not your cup of tea to live your politics out loud, that's okay. Because when you go into that voting booth, that's between you and that touch screen, if you're in Georgia, as to how you cast your vote. And something I learned, there's a very large silent majority. And I learned this as mayor. It took a lot of discipline to stay out of the comment section, because when you're on social media, everything is loud. And this is what everybody thinks, and this is what everybody's talking about. But the reality is, a lot of times people who may agree with you just may not want to engage in that way. And they don't want to be bothered, and they don't want to be badgered and assaulted, for politics. So if you can still be political quietly, if that's your thing to do. But in this election season, what we don't want to have happen is that people are so disgusted and they are just so unhappy about everybody and everything that they disengage, because that's not what our democracy is about. So you can practice, you can be political in political in peace. I'll call it that.
I love that, political in peace. You can still participate, still be a part of it. I love that. Thank you. Dr. Shonda, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, so going back to the previous question, listening to everyone's account of how the media has this role and this responsibility to not produce information that's sensationalizing and like taking advantage of our emotions, it reminds me of what we call headline stress disorder, which isn't an official DSM diagnosis, but more so a phenomenon that was identified as individuals who experience increased stress and emotional dysregulation as a result of experiencing excessive amounts of news that's heavy for them. And so we want to do our best to choose our peace, choose ourselves over being too overwhelmed and exhibiting symptoms that aligns with that headline stress disorder.
Thank you. Thank you for that. All right, I want to go back to you, Natasha. What do you see as the most significant factors contributing to political polarization in today's society, and how can communities work to bridge these divides?
Well, I think, and I kind of talked about it when I first started talking, but I think one contributing factor is, again, the lack of shared civic spaces and opportunities for dialogue. Um, as we become more kind of separated in our political beliefs and social interactions, there are less chances for people who have different viewpoints to engage. I do agree with Keisha on protecting your peace. You know when a person's just not going to get it. But for those people that are willing to, have adult educated conversations, I think we are not coming into those spaces like this again. And I think that leads to a lack of understanding and empathy across lines. Another thing is economic inequalities and disparities, and the perception, again, as I said before, that the political system is not designed to serve the citizens that it's supposed to serve. I think that plays a crucial role when people feel, again, like their voices are not being heard. So to bridge these divides, I'm thinking, promoting civic education and engagement, again, encouraging community members to feel connected to their elected officials, not just the day that you vote, but being able to feel like there is a bridge there is a line of communication there, I think is really important. I think the responsibility is also on our elected officials to create opportunities for spaces where they can interact with their constituents, not just when they're seeking votes. So I think that's important as well. And again, focusing on shared goals, local solutions, and highlighting, again, for our mental health, positive examples, because again, we're constantly fed what's not working, but what is working in our system that we can build upon, what is working in our communities that we can build upon. And a lot of those things that are working are community rooted, created solutions that I think those in power, and I hate to say that word empower, those who hold power positions should pay more attention to. What are communities doing that work, and how can we pour funding and resources into those solutions? Because communities know what they need best. And we know what we need best for our mental health, right? So we just don't get it. So listen to our communities and provide resources for us to be able to access and pour into ourselves.
Love, love, love all of that. Shared goals, local solutions. And I like the idea of elected officials creating these safe spaces, right, for communities to be able to hold these conversations. You kind of spilled over into my next question that I had for Gigi. So again, kind of taking this a step further, how do intersectional issues such as race, gender, and socioeconomic status affect the political experiences and decisions of different communities?
Well, thank you for the question, Shanti. I think it's such an important one because we hear things like politics is local, it's national, but importantly, it's also personal, right? So much of who we are ends up getting invoked or brought into the conversations in some way as a part of our political discourse. So I think there's always an element of politics experience through the lens of identity. But that's probably especially true when we're in the midst of historical type elections where we have the potential for firsts, for example, where womanhood and Blackness and et cetera are being sort of centered in the conversation as we're considering our options, and so on. And so, as the more aspects of our kind of layered identity and complex identities are on the table and being invoked and being scrutinized as a part of the conversation, the more we are sort of getting pulled into the discourse, and the closer to home the conversation that in the discourse hits, which should be cues to us in terms of thinking about how we're experiencing what's happening. And I have to share kind of a personal account of how I've been experiencing that myself through this election. Just to kind of prime us to how quickly you can be felt to be centered in these conversations. I think folks probably are aware of what's been happening in Springfield as an example, Springfield, Ohio, that has brought sort of my community as a Haitian American person to the fore in a way that none of us sort of anticipated coming about, in ways that really can reveal unsettling and disturbing things and beliefs and ideas that people have about an entire community. And so I think it is absolutely a part of the conversation and a piece of what can contribute to the stress and how that stress shows up. It's one thing to be concerned about certain legislation or policies or et cetera that may seem a little bit far removed from your day-to-day sort of reality. But when it feels like we're potentially looking at leadership that does not fully see and appreciate the humanity of my community, which means of me, that sort of magnifies what's at stake and what it is that we're up against, and that can really activate a more intense emotionality and responses. And so, I really appreciate that question as an important piece of what's in play when we're talking about the political climate and how it affects our state of being.
Absolutely. And thank you for your personal account. I'm sorry what your community has been having to deal with. And that just adds another level of unnecessary stress. And it's so unfortunate that it's directed to one community. So, prayers up and well wishes as your community continues to kind of navigate through what has been happening. Okay, this next question is fun and it's for everyone. How do you see political views diverging amongst different generations? And what implications does this have for mental health within families? Because we've seen families be torn apart just because of political ideation and support and so forth. And so whoever kind of may want to jump in with that one, feel free to take it.
I often say my best focus groups go between my mother and my 22-year-old son. Between the two of them, I have a pretty good idea of what folk are thinking, especially Black people. They really are my most reliable. And it's interesting talking to my 22-year-old. There's some days, again, protecting your peace, I'm like, I can't do this with you today. And I've removed myself from the conversation. But there are other times that I learn a lot. He told me 2.5 years ago that the Democratic Party had a challenge with young Black men. And I thought that he was just kind of poking me, as our kids sometimes are prone to do. And sure enough, that's what the polling started to bear out. And I think it has to do with everything on how we receive our information. I'm not active on TikTok. I'm not even active on Facebook. So there's a lot that I miss, that I have to rely on my kids to give me, and vice versa with my mother. I'm also not sitting in front of the TV watching local news. I'm not reading, I read the newspaper online, but I'm not reading a hard copy of the newspaper. And I think it really speaks to just how we're all getting our information. Some people are getting it on television. They're seeing the commercials. In the case of my kids, they're getting it on TikTok, and they're so far ahead. Even when the president announced that he was not running for office, I literally just logged off of MSNBC, and my daughter sent me something saying that the president was not running again. I'm like, wait, what? Where'd you see this? Because I still had the TV on MSNBC. So there are times that it's comical, and there are other times that it's quite sobering, to say the least.
Thank you, Keisha. I'm not married and I don't have kids, but I kind of feel that way, like with my nieces and nephews and my brother and his family. And so it is very interesting though. And people should have a right to support who they want to support, but it can get a little tricky sometimes within the families. And certainly this younger generation, you know, they are making sure their voice is heard and they don't care what mommy or daddy or auntie or uncle thinks. So yeah, it gets to be a bit much. Would anyone else like to chime in on that? On the family dynamic?
Yeah, for sure, I'll definitely chime in. You know, even thinking about your partners, like spouses and things of that nature. There was a recent conversation that came up, I believe, on social media about like, does your partner have to have the same political views as you? And the comments varied significantly. Like some people were adamant that they had to, other people were saying that, you know, they would support their partner or whatever political views that they supported. But all in all, as you stated, Auntie Shanti, there are certain conflicts and tensions that can arise when we're not able to respect one another and we're not able to have empathetic conversations. And I think that's the main foundation there. So even if you do have someone who is close to you or a family member who you know, is in your family who doesn't necessarily have political views that aligns with yours, you should still be able to have empathy for them. You should still be able to hear them out and kind of like understand where they're coming from. Sometimes they are political views that don't necessarily align with your values, and sometimes they may. But the overall, the overall underlying goal here is to be able to identify ways in which we can still have a cohesive life. Like we're still going to be family. We're still going to be, you know, you're still going to be my spouse. How can we kind of like make this work while also having varying political views? It doesn't necessarily, from my perspective, it doesn't necessarily have to tear the family apart as long as we're able to have like a respectful conversation that's full of empathy, validation, and also recognizing like people don't just choose political views just because it's nothing else to do in life. They usually choose them because it aligns with something. It's based on their experiences that they've had. It's based on their worldviews. And if we get to a place where we can just understand that, I think then we'll be able to have more of a respectful conversation with others.
Absolutely. I love that. The late, great Aretha Franklin said it best, RESPECT. We just need a little respect. Can we just respect each other in the household? Come on, y'all. And you teed up. Y'all are making my job easy tonight. I'm loving it. The panelists are doing such a great job. And you touched on empathy. And that was actually around my next question for Gigi. So Gigi, can you speak on the importance of empathy in discussions around politics, especially in intergenerational contexts? And how can we cultivate this empathy?
Mm-hmm. That, I think that really is where the rubber meets the road on this conversation. So thank you so much for that segue, Chandra. And I think first I want to set this up by making sure we're thinking about this in the same way, because I think sometimes people confound empathy with sympathy, right? And sympathy is the piece that's more about sort of feeling sorry for folks and that kind of thing. But empathy gets at something a bit deeper and a bit more relational in terms of, can you see the person on the other side? Can you hear the heart of what's being communicated? Can you feel the experience, right? That ability to sort of stretch our consciousness and pour it into walking through the world as someone else. And I think the absence of that has so much to do with the ways we have come to otherize each other in ways that have really caused this polarization that we're seeing, and what causes us to kind of lose sight of the humans on the other side of these debates and these discussions. And here again is where a feature of our modern society, social media, doesn't help, right? Because there's that sort of how has my niece described it in terms of a social media thug or gangster kind of language. When you're behind the keyboard and you're not face to face with the person where you can look to them eye to eye, there's that ability to sort of miss the weight of the words that you say and what's conveyed and what the human impact of that is. And so I think that piece has so much to do with what has led to the toxicity of our conversations in this space. And it's unfortunate because empathy is kind of what we do among the creatures in the world, what sort of sets us apart as humans and kept us functioning in communities and in tribes is that ability to sort of feel each other's pain. Yet we do have to do some work around that when we want to channel that in strategic ways, because there are also some biases around empathy, right? We're more likely to feel empathy with people who look more like us, people who feel like they're in our in group as opposed to out group. And so it requires another layer of effort and intentionality when we want to be able to extend that broadly. But the good news is it is a muscle that can be trained and that can be built up. We can grow our capacity to sit with, to be with, and to feel others and to be able to understand their perspective. A key part of that starts with listening, right? A key way that we begin that process has to do with not the kind of listening that's about how am I going to respond and what am I going to offer up in this conversation, in this back-to-back, but can I really hear the heart of what someone is expressing? Can I appreciate their perspective, even if I don't agree with it, right? It doesn't mean that I have to endorse it and be all about it, but can I extend my understanding enough to get what it might be like to feel like it would be pretty terrifying to have folks who feel like a threat to my livelihood coming into my space? Can some part of me at least touch that and find that sort of common ground and that commonality to kind of work from? And I think the other piece that really can help us go a long way in terms of cultivating empathy is being intentional about forcing ourselves into spaces outside of what's normal and familiar and comfortable to us, right? My sort of greatest opportunities for growth and empathy came from, spending time abroad and in parts of the world where I felt, completely sort of minoritized and had to figure out, okay, how do I communicate? How do I feel that same sense of power and confidence that I have when I'm in US and on my territory, right? And so how do I get to places where I'm creating opportunities to engage people who have different views than I do and find ways to see the human faces of the things that we talk about, right? We can talk about guns and what it means and et cetera, but when you sit with a kiddo who was at Appalachian High School this past week when things went left, or the parent who had to try to figure out how do I get a hold of my child, that takes on a whole other sort of element to what's at stake and what it is that we're talking about. And so I think creating and stepping into those opportunities to see and experience the other side in human form can go a long way in helping to restore that connection of the humanity that seems to be missing from a lot of our conversations.
Ooh, that was so good. Oh my gosh. Cultivating empathy, seeing the human side. Y'all, I don't need you to feel sorry for me. I just need you to put yourself in my shoes for 10 seconds, for 30 seconds, for one day. We learned about, my mama used to say, child, until they walk a mile in my shoes. People don't understand what we've been through. And so being able to just get back to humanity. I remember being a young girl and, seeing both conventions on TV and, we would watch them both, or we had friends that were supporting, one political party and we supported another, but it wasn't nasty. It wasn't, inhumane. It's gotten out of hand. And so thank you for that, Gigi, as we continue on this quest for humanity to protect our peace and to just, have good mental health for everyone as we continue to exercise our rights, right, and be a part of this political process. We have about 10 or 15 minutes left. I think we're going to get into Q&A soon, but I just want to bring this up briefly. I think it's interesting how, and some of y'all may know I used to work in the entertainment industry for a really long time. And so it's interesting how a lot of our entertainers and athletes and creatives are getting attacked just, when they speak up or exercise, their right or talk about who they're voting for. It's so unfair, I think, to that community. And we do know that oftentimes, not maybe all the time, but sometimes the voices of our creatives and talents, can sway popular opinion, or if someone's kind of on the fence. Anyone want to just talk briefly about, just about that, and how that really kind of affects us, even just seeing people that we look up to being attacked during this process?
No, I think we have to remember it's bullying. Even when it's someone who's an NBA star or a Grammy winning artist, it's still bullying. And I can't remember what the issue was when I was mayor, but there were some entertainers who came out and spoke favorably about whatever the position was. I was blown away, one, by the onslaught that they received, and secondly, how deeply impacted they were. Because you think of entertainers as often these untouchable people, but they are human. And when you read those comments, it impacts you as well. And I think we have to remember that that these are, they're people too, period. And I just want to go back to something Gigi talked about. I did a panel once at Georgetown for their Institute of Politics. It's a very conservative congressman and myself. And you would think that we would just be at each other like this. As we sat talking one-on-one, guess what? We wanted all the same things for our communities. We wanted jobs. We wanted our communities to be safe. We wanted our kids to be able to go to great schools. There was no daylight between what we wanted. And what I learned during my time as mayor, I often had to get out of my own way. We often think it's somebody else's politics. Sometimes it's our own politics. When I was mayor and I would have to go over to the state capitol to talk about what my agenda was and what I wanted from the legislature, I remember affordable housing was a big push from our administration. And I remember thinking, this guy from South Georgia is not going to care about affordable housing in Atlanta. Maybe I should take that off the list. My biggest advocate was David Ralston, Speaker of the House from the Blue Ridge Mountains, one. Secondly, they all cared about affordable housing. Now, it may not have been for the same reasons I did, but there was this common thread. They either had to come into Atlanta to rent housing while they were in session, or their kids were living in Atlanta. So I share that to say, sometimes you have to look at the man in the mirror, because we think our politics are pristine and our positions are indefensible. And sometimes we have to get out of our own way, as well, as Gigi said, and just be empathetic to other people's positions and in their politics.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that, Keisha. We have more commonalities than not, right? Like you said, we want our kids to be safe. We want to be able to put food on our tables. We want good schools in our neighborhoods. We want our elderly to be cared for and taken care of. And so we got to get back to the humanity in the election process. And that is why I am so proud of my team at Silence to Shame for starting this conversation, because nobody's really having these conversations around mental health and the political climate. And we certainly hope to continue that. You'll be joining us for our next one on October 10th, which is World Mental Health Day, and then another one on October 22nd. So we would love for you all to spread the word and continue to get this great information out. Okay, so before we go into Q&A, and pardon me, I'm getting over a little cold. I have one last question that I want to ask Natasha, and then we're going to open up for Q&A. In your experience, how effective are grassroots movements in influencing political change, and what can be done to strengthen these movements?
So I think when you think about grassroots movements, I mean, they're extremely influential, going all the way back to the civil rights movement, right? And then coming up into, current culture, the Black Lives Matter movement, the Me Too movement. I think they're really effective drivers of political change. And they're also drivers of awareness, right? Like a lot of times we might be impacted by something, or we might be unaware of things happening or just kind of unplugged because we didn't log on that day. But I even think about, with the Me Too movement, and Shanti, we talked about having, roots in the entertainment industry, but it was one of those moments like, wait a minute, you kind of go back like, I remember being in the studio, and you think about these things in a different way. And you do gain empathy for people who have been impacted by the reasons that these, movements had to be created to begin with, right? So I think that, they're influential in creating that awareness, creating that empathy, understanding that, wow, it's not just one person who's been impacted. This is like large communities of people that are impacted by this injustice. And it really generates momentum, as you even see with students now protesting on campuses and things like that. It creates momentum. That is where, social media can be a positive thing, because with these hashtag movements, students are more aware and more willing to stand up and call out injustices in a way that we weren't able to before we were able to kind of log online and connect with one another. So I think the strength in that is the ability to mobilize when it's done right. And the importance of grassroots movements is to engage, but then it's also important for them to remain consistent, right? Not just, becoming a hashtag trend, but also sustaining engagement over time, influencing policy. A lot of times we get really riled up over an issue, right? And we want that issue to change. And then again, this feeds into the mental health of our communities. We don't see change because we often aren't aware that all of the issues that impact us are rooted in the policies that guide us and direct us and govern, our day-to-day actions. So I think it's going to be really important for grassroots movements to tie the initiatives to some sort of policy change that needs to be implemented, and strategic advocacy. So yes, get everyone excited and riled up about it, but then what? What are we going to do after the march? What are we going to do after the big Zoom call? What are we going to do, after this day? And going to our, our current elections, what are we going to do after the election? And I think it's really important for our communities to prepare for either outcome. What are we going to do as communities? Obviously the goal is to have one outcome, which I can't speak of in my Georgia Watch hat, but the goal is for an outcome, right? But what are we going to do regardless as communities to strengthen, build capacity, and ensure that we can thrive regardless of what happens after November?
Amen. Mobilize when done right. That is the key. It's a lot of work left to be done. Thank you for breaking that down, Natasha. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are now moving into our Q&A session. I also did want to shout out Paul Lamont, who said, in ancient Rome and Greece, if you all recall, people engaged in dialogue and respected each other's opinions. Can we just get back to that? Can we just, I'm just saying. All right, first question up. Comes from Michelle Selman Fisher. Would you be willing to recommend media platforms that mitigate misinformation and disinformation? And also, how do we sift and sort media? Reporting when people have PhDs next to their names are at the forefront of a lot of these narratives. Anybody want to take that?
I mean, I'm on Apple News all the time because I can get an assortment of perspectives, and there's some more reputable publications that, thankfully populate my Apple News feed. So they're out there. Obviously there's some that are more left leaning, more right leaning, but there's some with still very solid journalistic standards out there. I read a lot of things, from whether it's the, Washington Post or whatever it is. I access it on my Apple feed through my subscription and get what I think to be pretty objective analysis of the news.
Thank you, Keisha. Would anyone else like to list anything or add any comments? All right, we're gonna, oh, were you gonna say something, Natasha?
I was going to say, leaning again into your kind of community-based resources, your community-based advocacy organizations, where you can kind of understand their mission and understand that they're there to serve you. And then also, like for someone who's a health policy wonk, like Becker's healthcare report or Kaiser Family Foundation, like really looking into if you even it's hard to control the media, but if when you see it reported, go to someone reputable that's data driven that can, either fact check what you have been seeing. So I would say fact check everything. If you see it, fact check it. And that doesn't mean just see if someone else has reposted it on social media, but see if there's a reputable resource that is, especially in the age of AI, especially in the age of AI, it may look real, but being able to kind of fact check it with a reliable resource is very important.
That's a great point. And AI, certainly, that's another panel for another day, but we know that there is certainly a lot out there. Very well said. We're going to go to our next question, which I think will probably be for our psychologists. How can we socialize, and actually for parents, how can we socialize our children and young people in an effective way to not internalize the behaviors of these leaders who are in leadership roles, especially when they see them in positions of status and wealth? One was a past president. Would you, Gigi, or Dr. Shonda like to take that?
Yes, I would love to take that question. I tend to work with children and young adults. So, I always talk to the parents that I work with and I encourage them to let them know, like, tell your children that just because they see adults doing it doesn't necessarily mean that it's okay. Because kids oftentimes, they associate adulthood with, that's okay. It's with goodness, or, that because they're doing it, that means that it's fine, when in actuality it's not. Whether that's your parent or your teacher or someone that you're seeing on TV, it's important to allow children to recognize that, things that aren't okay. And also continue to socialize your children the way you would even if it was outside of election season. So like playing games with them, like, is this appropriate to say versus is this not appropriate to say? Is it okay to, ask a question in this tone versus asking it in this tone? Like, I'm a buff on like really engaging the kids that I work with on card games, and I like have statements that are like really mean and statements that are appropriate and nice or what have you, and I present them with the two statements and I have them choose like, okay, what's appropriate to say and what's not appropriate to say, and just a really simple way to help them to continue to internalize being polite, being able to be a good leader, and being able to socialize with other people their age and adults as well, and really again continuing to parent in a way that's not again, too leaning on what the news outlets are saying to your children, but you're making sure that you're instilling in them the values that you want them to have.
Thank you, Dr. Shonda. Instilling leadership skills, right? I think I also heard modeling the behavior. Parents, we need you to do that so that your kids can be proud of what they're seeing. Would you like to add anything, Gigi?
Yeah, I would. I echo a lot of what Shonda shared, but would just add also the importance of exposing them to counter models. I mean, I think if most of us think in our own experiences of the leaders who were most sort of impactful in shaping our trajectory and our decisions, et cetera, many of those are the folks closest to us who we saw on a day-to-day, right? So in the school space, in the church space, in the family space, are we exposing and elevating for our kiddos the examples of people who embody the values that we want them to strive for, right? And so it's an unfortunate reality that they have to see pictured at the highest levels of leadership, things that we wouldn't even allow them to do as children. But I think inside of their immediate circle and orbit, we have opportunities to provide counters to a lot of those problematic things they may be seeing outside of the home.
Absolutely. Thank you. Our next question is how do you recognize when a political conversation is turning into an argument? And I think Keisha touched a little bit, well, not on an argument, but just protecting your peace. She touched a little bit on that. Who wants to take that? How do you recognize when a political conversation might be going left, or how do you stop it before it becomes an
I
argument?
was gonna say, like with everything else, when something's going left. And, you know, sometimes you just have to be the bigger person and say, you know, I'd rather protect our friendship or our, you know, our working relationship than engage in politics. I recently asked my husband about someone's position at work because it's often good to get a different perspective. And he said, we're not talking about politics right now because it's, you know, and without saying it, like it's like super sensitive right now. So rather than be at odds, and I'm sure they both feel a certain way about their respective positions, it's we're not talking about politics right now. And I think that's you just have to know when to hold and when to fold. And if it feels like it's getting heated or someone's feeling or being sensitive or overly sensitive, I think that's when you walk away.
Know when to walk away. I love that. Anybody else want to chime in on that?
I would just add, I tend to listen to my body. So if I notice my ears getting hot or, you know, my face getting hot, you know, those physiological signs that are being activated, then I know, okay, it's time to kind of like reel it back and just, you know, say God bless and just end the conversation there. Because, you know, we don't want to get into a tussle, and the people like to tussle when it's around political season. And it's not worth it if we're aligned with keeping our peace and choosing ourselves as former Mayor Keisha Lance Bottom stated, then, you know, these types of conversations aren't worth engaging in. So my go-to is to listen to the body.
Love that. And James Taylor says, and recognize your own emotions, knowing your emotions are turning left. So you said that is perfect. Did you want to quickly add anything, Gigi, before we go into our final thoughts?
I think Chandra said it all. You know, your intuition knows how to lead and guide you. So it's not some out there thing that will establish if we've stepped into murky waters. It's your own internal read, your own internal knowing, and that's the best cue to take a time out and sit it
That's
out.
right. I feel a hot flash coming on. I'm going. I'm by. I'm not talking politics. I'm not talking to nobody. I am exiting the building. All right, ladies, this has been incredible. What oh my God, an amazing first, you know, conversation, part one of our series of dealing with mental health and the political climate. I would like to go around and just have you all give any final thoughts on the upcoming elections, political developments, and what are your hopes and concerns for the political landscape? You know, we want to end on a high note, and particularly as it relates to social equity, community resilience. You know, what can we do as a people to be resilient, and what can we do to still enjoy being a part of the political process, right? Because it is our God-given, universe-driven, whatever you believe in, right to be able to vote. And we want to be able to participate and still be able to practice our peace in all of this. So I will start first with you, Natasha, and then we'll just go to Keisha, Gigi, and we'll go to Natasha, Keisha, Dr. Shonda, and end with Gigi.
I think my hope for, you know, this election and just for our Black communities and our communities that are disparately impacted by all kinds of policies that are in place. I think my hope is for them to begin to really, again, feel empowered, feel like they have a voice. I think conversations like these are important. And every time a conversation like this happens, or a conversation just that I'm like, I wish my whole community was on this call happens, it just drives me even more to create more spaces like this. So again, thank you, Shanti, for doing this. And so my hope is that more of our people will start to come to these conversations and start to engage and feel comfortable sharing in safe spaces so that we can work together as a community to, again, change the outcomes. This is not going to be an overnight solution. So I think, again, understanding that policy is a long game and it's going to take time, but, you know, we have to be resources for one another. We have to hold each other up when we burn out. And it has to be a connective, collective process implemented in our communities to really see long-term change.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Natasha. Keisha?
You know, democracies are messy, and that's the beauty of us living in a democracy. And I don't know of any place that's better than America. So I would just encourage people, don't give up on who we are, especially African Americans in this country. We literally built this country. When you go into the White House, you go into the basement, there's a utility closet. You open the door, there's a piece of glass on the wall where you can see the foundation of the building. That slaves built that foundation of that.
Wow.
And it is a very visual reminder of how much we have invested in this country. And, you know, it feels like this is just the worst of times, but you think about the history of our country, we've been through a lot. Civil rights movement, slavery, and all these things, and yet we still stand because generations before us didn't give up. So I would just say, may history be kind to us and remember us as a generation that didn't give up and kept pushing to make things better.
That was beautifully said. Thank you. We're gonna keep holding on to hope, right? And we're gonna hope for the best. Thank you so much, Keisha. Dr. Shonda.
Yes, well, I just want to say thank you again for having me a part of this conversation. In terms of things that I'm looking for in this upcoming election, of course, you know, focusing on the socioeconomic status of the marginalized communities, right? This is something that we continue to be impacted by, and it's just again, like our communities are suffering, so we need people who are concerned with the suffering that we are experiencing. In addition to that, you know, mental health and socioeconomic status are highly correlated. I cannot say that you know, I have a good quality of life and I'm living a abundant, emotionally well life if I'm stressed out about my light bill or, you know, things of that nature. So it's really important for us to identify ways that we can target both the SCS as well as the mental health. I love that millions of dollars has been put into that over the past campaign or the past political season, but I'm hoping for more. I think more change needs to happen, especially in regards to insurance companies and things of that nature. In terms of what I'm hoping for in the future, my hope is that our people, we continue to not just become involved in the national elections, but also local elections. So, you know, I can say that that's not something that I've always been privy to and always well informed of, but over this past election season in Delaware, I was, you know, very, very much so committed to identifying who the candidates were and actually donating to different candidates and their different policies that they have. But, you know, it's a good way for us to stay informed of what's happening in our communities, not just at the national level, but what's happening in our neighborhoods locally.
Thank you, Dr. Shonda. And last but not least, Gigi.
Yes, definitely want to begin again with thanks for the opportunity to speak with everyone. I agree with so much of what has been said. I think my biggest concern goes back to that empathy issue that was raised earlier, right? The risk or the danger of us getting more and more disconnected, of less of the capacity to see each other in this season is what worries me the most, because I think the consequences of that can be so problematic for us as a society. And so even as I think about that example that I invoked in terms of the situation in Springfield, where there was so much to be disturbed by and all of that, what also gives me a lot of hope, I think, was embodied and reflected in that same situation where you saw folks like John Legend, to get back to the idea of celebrities kind of leveraging their platform, who's originally from Springfield, Ohio, who came out and did his best to kind of combat the misinformation circulating around that. But you also saw regular members of the community galvanizing, coming together, showing up at Haitian restaurants as an act of solidarity to say, we too are here, are a part of this society, and we want you to know that we support you and want you here, you belong here. That too is a part of America. That's the America that brought my family here from Haiti. And that's the America that I hope will be invoked and will find its way again through the dark waters that we're wading through. And I think if we're to get on the other side of this season in history that we're in, as any sort of a cohesive democratic society, we've got to get back to seeing each other, to hearing each other, to seeing the humanity on the other side. So that's my greatest hope for us in this time.
100%, 100%. You all have been tuned into the political climate and mental health, weathering the storm. Mental health in a turbulent political climate. We've heard so many gems tonight, so many personal accounts, so much shared information and ideology and ideas. And we want to get back to shared goals, you know, have local solutions, create safe spaces, have more empathy, see the humanity in our neighbors. And I'll just end by saying, you know, democracy is and should be a blessing. And so my hope is that we can enjoy this democratic process and that we can vote for whoever we want to vote for, but be able to do it in a peaceful manner and be able to protect our minds and our bodies and our spirits. And so thank you all for tuning in this evening. I hope that you will follow us at Silence the Shame on Instagram, at Silence the Shame on Facebook. This is part 1 of a 3-part series that we will be doing. The next one is October 10th, and the one following that is October 22nd. If you want to hear more, see more, follow us, tell your community, you know, let's break these numbers. Let's have more people here. So take this information back out into the communities. This is a recorded webinar, so we will be pushing the content out and you can share it with your family members, friends, spouses, constituents. And so again, thank you so much and good night.